wasn't supposed to find the file. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was just the grieving widow. Isabella, the quiet trophy wife who was too fragile to handle the funeral arrangements, too confused to understand the estate, and too broken to be a threat. They thought 23 years of gaslighting had turned my brain into mush. But while my stepson Michael was downstairs in the mahogany-paneled library, pouring himself 3 fingers of my late husband's Macallan 25 and toasting to their victory, I was upstairs looking for evidence. My bedroom door was locked. A heavy oak chair was wedged under the handle to buy me time. I was sitting on the floor of the walk-in closet, bathed in the blue light of a laptop I wasn't allowed to touch, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hit the keys. The screen was locked. I sat back, panic rising in my throat. I looked around the closet, smelling the wool and stale tobacco of Andrew's coats, and then I remembered. Andrew didn't trust technology. He trusted paper. I crawled over to the built-in safe in the floor. I didn't know the combination, but I knew where he kept his emergency backup. He kept a first edition of The Great Gatsby on the top shelf, a story about a man who built a life on beautiful lies. I pulled it down and shook it. A small index card fluttered out. On it, in Andrew's jagged handwriting, it read, L. Wharf, $247. I typed it in. The screen blinked and the lock dissolved. The desktop was cluttered, but there, sitting in the top right corner, arrogant and plain, was a yellow folder labeled Project Isabella. Outside, the wind slammed against the house, shaking the window panes. A nor'easter was burying Boston under 2 feet of ice, trapping us inside. But the cold I felt didn't come from the drafty windows. I double-clicked the folder. I didn't find a care plan. I found a spreadsheet that froze the blood in my veins. At the top of the screen, in bold red letters, were the words, Liquidation Schedule. I scanned Phase 1, titled Social Isolation, and my stomach turned as I saw the status marked as complete. The notes were clinical and cold. Friends successfully diverted, and Martha kept away, told her Isabella was too unwell for visitors. They hadn't just canceled my bridge club or restricted my phone plan. They had systematically and surgically removed everyone who might have saved me. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, dragging me back to the night I finally understood what Phase 1 looked like in practice. It was 3 months ago, in mid-November, just weeks before Andrew died. He had insisted on hosting a dinner party for Senator Crawford, claiming it was crucial for the foundation. And despite my protest that he was too sick, Michael had organized everything. "You just have to look pretty, Mom," Michael had said, handing me a glass of champagne in the kitchen. "I put a little something in it to help you relax. You've been so high-strung lately." I took the glass. I trusted him then. God help me, I trusted him. I remembered walking into the dining room, the crystal chandelier fracturing the light into 1,000 blinding prisms. The room was filled with Boston's elite, the senator, 2 judges, and the board members of the hospital. They were all smiling, but as the liquid from Michael's special cocktail hit my bloodstream, their smiles seemed to stretch and distort, turning into grotesque masks of politeness. 20 minutes into dinner, the room began to tilt. I was trying to cut my roast duck, but the knife felt heavy and clumsy, like a tool made for a giant's hand. I looked up and saw Lydia watching me from across the table. She wasn't eating. She was just staring at my hands with a predator's focus, waiting. "Isabella?" Senator Crawford asked, his voice booming from the head of the table. "I was asking about your work with the library committee. Are you still chairing the gala?" I tried to answer. I tried to say, "Yes, we raised $1 million last year," but my tongue felt swollen, thick and useless in my mouth. I stammered, the words slurring together into a meaningless soup. The books." A hush fell over the table. The clinking of silverware stopped. "She's confused again," Michael whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. He stood up, projecting the image of the dutiful, long-suffering son. I'm so sorry, Senator. Her episodes are getting more frequent in the evenings. It's the sundowning. I'm not, I tried to say, pushing myself up from the chair. I'm not confused. But my legs wouldn't hold me. I stumbled, my hip catching the edge of the table. My hand flailed out for support and caught the stem of my wine glass. Crash! The sound was deafening. Red wine, an expensive Bordeaux that Andrew loved, exploded across the pristine white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric like a gunshot wound. It splashed onto the senator's wife's cream silk blouse. She gasped, jumping back. Oh my God! I'm sorry, I gasped, clutching the edge of the table, the room spinning violently now. I didn't mean... It's okay, Mom, Michael said, rushing to my side and gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. We've got you. Lydia, grab her purse. She doesn't know where she is. I know where I am, I cried, tears of humiliation burning my eyes. I'm in my house. This is my house. Of course it is, Lydia cooed, wiping wine off the table with a napkin, looking at the guests with sad, apologetic eyes. She gets so aggressive when she's confused. It's heartbreaking, really. We're looking into facilities, but Andrew just can't bear to let her go. The senator looked at me. He didn't see the hostess who had run this home for 2 decades. He saw a liability. He saw a broken, senile woman who couldn't be trusted with a fork, let alone a legacy. Take her upstairs, Andrew said from the head of the table. He didn't look at me. He looked at his wine glass, annoyed that it was empty. Get her out of here before she hurts someone. Michael marched me out of the room, his grip iron tight. As we reached the hallway, out of sight of the guests, the concern vanished from his face instantly. He leaned down to my ear, his breath smelling of mint and malice. You're embarrassing him, Isabella, he whispered. If you can't handle a simple dinner, maybe you shouldn't be eating with the adults anymore. He shoved me toward the stairs. I spent the rest of the night on the bathroom floor, vomiting up the cocktail he had given me, listening to the laughter downstairs. They weren't mourning my decline. They were celebrating it. That night wasn't a party. It was an audition for my incompetence, and I had played the role perfectly. Now let's go back to that cold closet, where the glow of the laptop revealed the next phase of my execution. I blinked the tears away, forcing myself back to the laptop screen. Phase 2, medical conditioning. The status was active. Notes: Dr. Trevor confirmed compliance. Anxiety medication dosage doubled Jan 14th. Complaints of memory loss documented in medical file fabricated. Patient is beginning to doubt her own recall. I stared at the date, January 14th. The day I fell asleep at the dinner table. The day Michael told me I was sundowning. In reality, I wasn't sundowning. I was drugged. Then my eyes drifted to the bottom of the list, where the text turned a violent shade of red. Phase 3, asset transfer and conservatorship. The status was listed as pending, with a target date of immediate post-funeral. But it was the final objective that made my blood run cold. Relocation of subject to secure facility, Sunrise Memory Unit. A secure facility. A memory unit. For a woman who remembered every single birthday, every anniversary, every slight, and every lie told to her for 2 decades. They weren't just going to steal my money. They were going to lock me away in a room with a plastic plant and a view of a parking lot until I actually did go insane. The house groaned, a low wooden moan that only these old Victorian homes in Brookline make when a nor'easter slams against the siding. Outside, the wind whipped off the Atlantic, turning the streets into tunnels of ice. In Boston, old money knows how to keep secrets, and these thick plaster walls were built to hold screams just as well as they held heat. That was when the silence was shattered. Not by the wind, but by a sound much closer to home. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, specifically the third board from the top of the stairs, which always whined under the weight of a heavy footstep. It wasn't the house settling. It was a predator approaching, and I knew instantly that Michael was coming up. I slammed the laptop shut. The sudden darkness of the closet was blinding. I heard his footsteps stop outside my bedroom door and held my breath, counting the beats of my own heart. 1, 2, 3, 4, praying the chair under the handle would hold and praying he wouldn't try the knob. The doorknob turned. The metal clicked against the wood of the chair. There was a pause, a silence so loud it rang in my ears. "Mom?" His voice was muffled by the oak door. It sounded gentle and concerned. The voice of a loving stepson checking on his grieving mother. It was the scariest sound I had ever heard. "Mom? You awake?" I squeezed my eyes shut. "Don't answer. If you answer, you have to open the door. If you open the door, he'll see the laptop." He jiggled the handle again. Harder this time. Testing the resistance. "Must be sleeping," he muttered. I listened to his breathing on the other side of the wood. He was standing there, listening, waiting for a sound of movement, waiting for a slip-up. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. Creak, thump, creak. Moving away down the hall toward the guest room where he and Lydia were staying, I slumped against the wall of the closet, clutching the laptop to my chest like a shield. I lay in the dark, staring at the rows of designer coats hanging above me, Andrew's coats smelling of wool and tobacco, and realized the truth. I wasn't waiting for a probate hearing. I wasn't waiting for the lawyers to read the will. I was waiting for my execution. Whatever phase 3 was, it wasn't happening next month. It was happening now, this weekend. While we were trapped together by the snow, with no power, no landline, and cell towers down across the county, I had to get the file off this computer. I had to hide it. And then I had to survive breakfast. The storm finally broke on Sunday morning, but instead of bringing relief, it left the world encased in a silent white tomb that felt final. Weak sunlight struggled through the ice-covered windows, turning the guest room, where I had eventually crawled into bed fully clothed, into a crystalline prison that magnified every sound in the house. I woke up to voices downstairs. I didn't move a muscle, keeping my eyes squeezed shut as I strained to listen. My hearing had always been sharp, something Andrew hated and often used to gaslight me by saying, "You hear things that aren't there, Isabella." But I wasn't hallucinating the voices drifting up from the heating vent. I was hearing the architects of my demise planning the final demolition. "We can't wait any longer," Lydia's voice hissed up the vent. It was sharp, urgent, and stripped of the sugary coating she used when she spoke to me. "Mason needs to file this week, before she figures it out, before she talks to anyone." "She won't talk," Michael's voice rumbled back, calm and dismissive. "She has no one to talk to. We made sure of that. Martha thinks she's practically catatonic. The neighbors think she's dangerous." "You don't know that," Lydia snapped. "What about Helen?" "Helen is in Savannah, 6 hours away minimum. And even if she wanted to help, what can she actually do? She has no legal standing in Massachusetts, and she walked away from her own kid. No court is going to take her seriously over Dr. Trevor." "Fine, but I want this done. File the conservatorship petition tomorrow. First thing Monday morning. I'm not spending another month babysitting her while she lives rent-free in what's supposed to be our house." Our house? They had already claimed it. They had already mentally redecorated. They had probably already chosen the color they would paint over my yellow kitchen. "Tomorrow," Michael agreed. "I'll call Mason as soon as the phones are back up. We'll file the emergency petition. Dr. Trevor's evaluation is already written. He did it last month based on my notes. All we need is to get her in front of a judge." Tomorrow. I had less than 24 hours. Suddenly the house shuddered. A hum started in the basement, low at first, then rising to a roar. The furnace kicked on, and the bedside lamp flared to life, blinding me for a second. Power. My phone, my regular phone, the one they monitored, was sitting on the nightstand. It lit up, buzzing with a flood of delayed notifications. A news alert about the state of emergency in Suffolk County, a spam message about my car warranty, and a chilling appointment reminder from Dr. Trevor's office. But buried beneath the digital noise was a single text message from an unknown number that stopped my heart. The text read, "Storage Unit, 247 Lewis Wharf. Your name is on the rental agreement because Andrew added you as an authorized user 3 years ago. The key is taped under his desk drawer in the basement office. You must go today. Before they search the house, before they find it first, a friend." I stared at the glowing pixels. Lewis Wharf. I looked out the window at the street below. The snowplow had piled dirty banks of ice against the curb, gray and solid as concrete. The neighborhood was silent. That's the thing about this part of Massachusetts. The houses are close enough to touch, but the neighbors are miles away emotionally. Andrew chose that location deliberately. Lewis Wharf was expensive, secure, and notoriously discreet. But why was my name on it? Why would a man who spent 20 years hiding his life from me add my name to his secret storage unit? Another text arrived, 3 bubbles popping up in rapid succession. "Don't trust Mason Grant. He's helped Andrew do this before. Everything you need is in Unit 247. Financial records, legal documents, and proof of what they're planning. But you have to get there today. Once they file tomorrow, you'll lose access to everything. They'll freeze your accounts, restrict your movement, and make you disappear." My blood ran cold. Make you disappear. I typed back, my thumbs clumsy. "Who are you? How do I know this isn't a trap?" The response was immediate, as if they were holding the phone, waiting for me. "Because if I wanted to trap you, you'd already be committed. Andrew kept files on everyone, including Michael, including the others before you. Get the files before Michael finds them. You have hours, not days." The others before me. How many others were there? My bedroom door opened. No knock. No warning. Lydia stood there. She was wearing Lululemon yoga pants and a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. Her makeup was flawless, despite the power outage. "Oh good, you're awake." Her eyes flicked immediately to my phone. I casually set it face down on the nightstand, forcing my hand not to tremble. "We're making breakfast," she said, her voice bright and artificial. "French toast. Your favorite, right?" She had never asked me what my favorite anything was. In 5 years of being my stepdaughter-in-law, she had never once asked if I liked coffee or tea. Now suddenly, she cared about my breakfast preferences. "I'm not hungry," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "You need to eat, Isabella. You're getting too thin. People will talk." She moved into the room uninvited and picked up the framed photo on my nightstand, me and Andrew on our wedding day. I looked so young in that picture, so naive and so stupidly and blindly in love. Michael and I were thinking we should go through Andrew's things this week. His clothes, personal effects, the office. She set the photo down hard. "Get everything organized for the estate lawyers. Would you want to help? Or would that be too painful?" They wanted access to the office, to search it, to find anything I might have seen on the laptop, to find the key taped under the desk. "I can help," I said. I should be the one to do it." "Wonderful. We'll start this afternoon." She turned and left, leaving the bedroom door wide open, a subtle, terrifying power move that screamed, "You have no privacy here, and this is not your room anymore." I waited until the echo of her footsteps faded at the bottom of the stairs before I dared to move. My hands were trembling as I pulled on jeans and a thick sweater, feeling like a thief in my own bedroom. I grabbed my heavy coat from the closet and dug my car keys out of my purse, my heart hammering against my ribs with the terrified rhythm of a trapped animal. I crept into the hallway. Silence. I took the stairs one by one, skipping the third step, the squeaky one. I reached the foyer. My hand touched the cold brass of the front door handle. "Mom?" Michael's voice sliced through the silence, stopping me dead in my tracks. He appeared from the kitchen holding a steaming coffee mug and leaning against the dining room doorframe with a casualness that was almost insulting. He looked unconcerned, but his body was positioned perfectly to block the hallway, turning his relaxed posture into a physical barricade. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" "Just to the store," I said, clutching my purse tighter. "We're low on coffee." His eyes flicked to the kitchen behind him. "We have coffee. Lydia bought 3 bags yesterday before the storm hit. Blue Mountain. Your favorite." I prefer the hazelnut one. The cheap kind." He took a sip of his coffee, watching me over the rim of the mug. "It's pretty icy out there, Mom. The city hasn't finished plowing the side streets. Lots of black ice. Why don't you let me go? Just tell me which brand and I'll grab it later." He wasn't asking. He was telling. "Actually," I improvised, my mind racing, "I also need to pick up a prescription. At CVS. I'm completely out." "Which prescription?" "My blood pressure medication." "I didn't know you were on blood pressure medication," he said, setting his mug down with a slow, deliberate movement that made my skin crawl. "Is that new? Because that seems like something we should tell Dr. Trevor about immediately." He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen like a weapon. "Let me text him right now, because high blood pressure can be serious, and we wouldn't want any unfortunate interactions." A trap. I had walked straight into a trap. If I named a medication, he would verify it with the doctor. When Dr. Trevor said I wasn't prescribed it, that would be evidence. Evidence of confusion. Evidence that I didn't know my own medical history. "You know what?" I said, backing away from the door. "Let me call the pharmacy first. Make sure it's actually ready for pickup. You're right about the roads. I should wait until they're safer." Michael's smile returned, warm, understanding, and victorious. "Good thinking, Mom. Safety first. We can't have you slipping and falling. At your age, a hip fracture is basically a death sentence." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. I retreated to the guest bathroom, the only room on the first floor with a working lock, and turned the deadbolt with shaking fingers. My legs gave out instantly, and I collapsed onto the closed toilet lid, struggling to breathe as the walls seemed to close in on me. I was a prisoner in a house I owned, guarded by a son who was actively plotting my erasure. I fumbled for the burner phone, the old cracked iPhone 6 I had hidden in my winter boot for 3 years. I couldn't drive to Lewis Wharf. They would stop me, but maybe someone else could go. I opened the text chain with Helen. Helen Walker, Andrew's first wife, was the woman he had demonized for 30 years as unstable, alcoholic, and violent. But as I stared at her name on my screen, I realized she wasn't the monster he described. She was the survivor who had escaped the monster I was currently living with. I hadn't spoken to her in a decade, but she was the only person on Earth who knew the exact shape of the hell I was trapped in. I texted Helen, "I need help. Can't talk. They're filing a conservatorship petition tomorrow. An anonymous person says Andrew has a storage unit at Lewis Wharf, Unit 247. The key is taped under his desk. I can't get there. They're watching me. Can you come?" I hit send. The message bar turned green, then blue. My phone buzzed. "On my way. Give me 4 hours. Don't do anything until I get there. And Isabella, be careful. If they're filing that fast, they're scared. Scared people are the most dangerous kind." 4 hours. I flushed the toilet for sound, ran the tap, and splashed cold water on my face. Then I unlocked the door. Michael was still standing in the hallway, sipping his coffee, waiting. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Much," I said. I walked into the kitchen. Lydia was plating the French toast. It smelled delicious. It smelled like home. "Sit," she said. "Eat." I sat. I picked up my fork, and I prepared to give the performance of my life. The next 3 hours were an exercise in psychological torture that tested every ounce of my sanity. The house was aggressively silent, amplifying the sound of Lydia in the living room where she had set up a command center. She spread brochures across the coffee table like tarot cards predicting my doom, glossy pamphlets for Sunrise Senior Living and Golden Years Memory Care that promised dignity while selling incarceration. Michael sat in the leather armchair, the one Andrew used to claim was his throne. He was typing on his laptop, probably emailing the lawyer, but every few minutes he would stop and look at me with calculation, like he was checking for cracks in a porcelain doll. 12 p.m. The snow continued to fall. My phone was silent in my pocket. Had Helen turned back? "You're pacing," Michael said, not looking up from his screen. "Why don't you sit down, watch some TV?" "I'm just stretching my legs," I said. "You seem agitated," Lydia noted, picking up a small notebook. She wrote something down. I knew what she was writing. Subject displays agitation, pacing, inability to settle. They were building the medical file in real time. And then the silence was shattered. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive blast that made us all freeze like statues. Lydia dropped her pen, and Michael snapped his laptop shut with a violence that betrayed his calm facade. "Who on earth?" Michael muttered, standing up and moving to the window with the jerky movements of a man who knows his careful plans are about to be disrupted. "It's a Subaru," he said, his voice tight, "with main plates." "Helen." The doorbell rang again. 3 sharp blasts, impatient and angry. "I'll get it," Michael said. "If it's a solicitor, I'll send them away," I said, staring pointedly at his hand on my arm until he slowly released me. "But I won't hide in my living room like a naughty child while you answer my door." I marched toward the foyer with my heart in my throat, knowing that whatever was on the other side of that wood was either my salvation or my undoing. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. A blast of freezing air hit me, smelling of ice and exhaust. And there she was, Helen Walker. She looked older than the last time I saw her, but her eyes, those steel gray eyes, were burning with a fire that could melt the ice on the porch. "Hello, Isabella," she said. Her voice was rough, like gravel. Michael appeared behind me. "Helen," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Nice to see you too, Mikey," she said, using the childhood nickname he hated. "I'm here to pick up the boxes." "What boxes?" Michael demanded. Helen looked at me. This was the moment. The script we hadn't rehearsed, but both understood. The photo albums," I lied. "We talked about it last week, before the storm. I told her she could have the old family albums, from before me." "Well, I didn't forget," Helen said, pushing past me. "This is the first wife," Helen announced, looking Lydia up and down with a terrifying scrutiny that made the younger woman shrink. "The one who got away. And you must be the... what? The assistant? The nurse? Or just the latest accessory?" "I'm Michael's wife," Lydia stammered, bristling but stepping closer to her husband for protection against the force of nature standing in the hallway. "Ah," Helen said. "Wife number 3? Or is it 4? You go through them just as fast as your father did. It must be genetic." "You're a lunatic," Michael spat, his face twisting with ugly resentment. "And you're trespassing." Helen's face hardened instantly, the moment of vulnerability vanishing behind a wall of steel. "I'm family," she corrected him coldly. "Biologically and permanently, whether you like it or not. And I'm here for the boxes, Michael, not your approval." She turned to me. "Where are they, Isabella? I left my engine running." They're in the garage?" I lied, pointing toward the detached structure. We walked out into the storm, the wind whipping our hair across our faces. As soon as the heavy front door clicked shut behind us, the performance dropped, but the physical acting had to continue. "Keep performing," Helen hissed, linking her arm through mine. "He's watching from the living room window. We have to go to the garage first." We trudged through the snow to the garage. Inside, out of Michael's line of sight, Helen didn't reach for the albums. She grabbed an empty cardboard box from the recycling pile and shoved some old photo albums inside for weight. "Carry this," she ordered. "It's a prop. We need to look like we're moving things to my car. We walked back out into the cold, carrying the decoy box between us, heading for her Subaru. Did you get the real ones? I whispered, glancing at the house where Michael's silhouette stood like a sentry. They're in the trunk, Helen said. We reached her car, and she popped the trunk. Inside sat 2 identical banker's boxes. She tossed the decoy box into the back after retrieving the old albums there and pointed to the new ones. She then stacked the old albums on top of the new box, with the old albums on top in case Michael decided to peek inside. These are the payload, she whispered. I went to Lewis Wharf this morning. Andrew added me to the access list in 1999 and never removed me. This box has the financials, the medical logs, everything. I stared at them. But the text, it said the key was under his desk in the office. The key is for the lockbox buried at the bottom of this crate, Helen clarified. The storage unit was open, but the heavy stuff is locked up tight in a fireproof safe inside this box. You need that key to open it. So we just leave? I asked, reaching for the handle. No. Helen stopped me. If we leave, Michael calls the cops. We need him to take these boxes inside. We need him to carry his own death warrant into that office so you can open it tonight. How? We're going to use a Trojan horse, she said, lifting one end of the heavy evidence box. We're going to carry this back to the porch. And then you're going to have a breakdown. You have to scream at me. You have to reject these memories so violently that Michael takes them back inside just to shut you up. I looked at the house. Michael was still watching. He saw us swap boxes and probably thought we were organizing albums. He had no idea we were arming a bomb. I have to be cruel, I realized. Vicious, she corrected. Make him believe you hate me. Make him believe you are on his side. Grab the other end, I said, gripping the cold cardboard handle. Let's put on a show. We reached the porch. I took a deep breath, thought about the way Michael looked at me when he offered me the poisoned coffee, that look of faux concern masking deep malice, and I channeled every ounce of rage I had suppressed for 23 years, but instead of directing it at the boxes, I directed it at the idea of letting them go. I kicked the door open. No, I screamed, clutching the box to my chest like a jealous child. I've changed my mind. You can't have them. I stumbled into the foyer and dropped the heavy box on the foyer floor with a heavy thud, standing over it protectively. Michael and Lydia jumped, startled by the noise. Isabella, Helen shouted, stepping into the hallway. We had a deal. You said I could take them. Get away from them, I shrieked, my eyes wild. They're mine. He was my husband. You can't just walk in here and steal his memory. You crazy old bat, Helen spat, playing her role perfectly. You promised me these albums yesterday. You can't just flip a switch because you're having an episode. I'm not having an episode, I yelled, grabbing Michael's arm. Michael, make her leave. She's trying to steal from us. Don't let her take the box. Michael looked at me, frantic, possessive, and irrational. It fit his narrative perfectly. He stepped forward, puffing up his chest. You heard her, Helen, Michael said, putting a hand on the door. Get out. This is ridiculous, Helen sneered. She's losing her mind. Get out, I screamed again, kicking the door toward her. Fine, Helen said, backing away. Keep your garbage. I don't need reminders of him anyway. She turned and slammed the door behind her. The glass rattled and silence descended on the foyer. I stood there, heaving, standing guard over the box that contained the evidence needed to send Michael to prison. Mom? Michael said softly, using his calm the patient voice. It's okay. She's gone. The albums are safe. He looked at the box. Let's get these out of the hallway, okay? You don't need to worry about them. He bent down and picked up the heavy box. I'll put them in the office, he said. They'll be safe in there. I watched him carry the Trojan horse into the belly of the beast, wiping a fake tear from my cheek to hide the triumph in my eyes. Helen slammed the door behind her. I stood there, heaving and pretending to cry. I covered my face with my hands. Mom? Michael stepped forward cautiously. I hate her, I sobbed into my hands. I hate her so much. Michael let out a breath. He bought it. He believed the performance because it fit his narrative. I was emotional, unstable, and hysterical. It's okay, he said. He looked down at the boxes. Are these the albums? Yes, I sniffled. Just old photos. He lifted the box containing the forensic accounting of his crimes and carried it toward the office. I watched him go, a wave of dizzying irony washing over me. The enemy was physically transporting his own death warrant into the house, believing he was merely doing a favor for a senile old woman. The sun began to dip behind the slate gray clouds at 3 p.m. The house was silent again. I sat in the wingback chair, waiting. Across the room, Michael was on the phone with Mason Grant. Yes, Mason, I know, Dr. Trevor is ready. Perfect. And the injection? If she becomes agitated? My blood ran cold. The injection. They were planning to chemically subdue me before I even set foot in the courtroom. Michael hung up. Good news, Mom, he said, walking over to me. We got an appointment with the judge first thing tomorrow. Lydia is packing a bag for you. Packed. Ready to ship. Like a piece of furniture that didn't fit the new decor. Where are the boxes? I asked softly. I think I'd like to see them now. If I'm going away, I'd like to look at the pictures. Michael hesitated, then sighed. Fine, I'll bring one out. But if you start crying again, I'm taking it away. He walked into the office and emerged 30 seconds later, holding a burgundy leather album. I exhaled, a long, shaky breath. Helen had baited the trap perfectly. I waited until I heard their bedroom door click shut upstairs. Then I stood up. I walked to the office door. The office smelled of Andrew, tobacco, leather, and the faint, chemical scent of printer ink. It was a smell that used to make me feel safe. Now it smelled like a crime scene. The two bankers' boxes sat on the floor near the bookshelf. I knelt beside them and lifted the lid of the second box, my heart hammering against my ribs. On top was a layer of old National Geographic magazines used as camouflage, but underneath lay the prize, a metal lockbox. It was gray, heavy, and fireproof. Taped to the top was a sticky note in Helen's jagged handwriting. Phase 1 is knowing. Phase 2 is proving. I reached into my bra and pulled out the brass key, 247. It turned with a satisfying click. There were 3 thick manila envelopes. Rebecca, 1995 to 1998. Sarah, 2002-2003. Isabella, 2001 present. I realized with a jolt why Helen's name wasn't there. Helen was the prototype, and these were the production models. I opened Rebecca's file first, and the smell of old paper drifted up, carrying the scent of a 20-year-old crime. Inside were copies of bank statements showing massive transfers to offshore accounts in Puerto Rico, followed by a damning letter from Dr. Trevor dated 1998. He had diagnosed her with hysterical paranoia just weeks before she was set to inherit the exact same playbook they were running on me. I opened Sarah's file. Sarah died in a car accident. Everyone knew that. She drove off a bridge in icy conditions. But there, clipped to the autopsy report, was a mechanic's invoice dated 2 days before her death. It detailed a critical brake line repair, stamped customer declined service. My finger hovered over the signature at the bottom. It wasn't Sarah's handwriting. It was Andrew's jagged scrawl, clumsily attempting to mimic her signature to sign her death warrant. And then I opened my file. I flipped past the financial records, the millions of dollars he had siphoned out of our joint accounts, and found the emails between Andrew and Michael. The reply from Andrew was even worse. Agreed. Proceed with phase 2. But keep it clean. I don't want a repeat of Sarah. That was too messy. Let's do this legally. By the time I'm gone, I want her to be a ghost in her own house. I stared at the words until they blurred. A ghost in her own house. They hadn't just planned to steal my future. They had scripted my erasure while sitting at my dinner table. I took out my phone and photographed every single document, the emails, the signatures, the mechanic's invoice. I uploaded them to a cloud account I had created 5 minutes ago using the new Wi-Fi password Lydia had foolishly written down for me. I walked back into the living room just as Michael came down the stairs. "Did you look at the album?" he asked. "I think." I paused, letting my voice crack perfectly. "I think you're right about tomorrow, about the facility." Michael stopped dead, his glass halfway to his mouth, stunned by my surrender. "You do?" "Yes," I whispered, making my eyes wide and watery. "I don't feel safe here anymore. I feel confused, Michael. I forget things, and with the storm, I just feel so vulnerable. I don't want to be a burden to you and Lydia." Michael's face transformed instantly. The suspicion vanished, replaced by a smug, triumphant pity that made me want to scream. In his mind, he had won. He didn't even have to fight because the stupid, fragile widow had simply rolled over and exposed her throat. He didn't realize that I was positioning myself to rip his out. "Oh, Mom," he said, patting my shoulder. That's a very brave decision. We'll leave first thing in the morning." I went to my room, but I didn't undress. I put on my thermal layers and sturdy boots, and I waited. By 12 a.m., the house was silent. I crept down to the basement, the darkness pressing against my skin like a physical weight. Using the dim light of my phone, I located the breaker box and found breaker 4, security perimeter. I flipped the switch, and a soft, final click echoed through the house. Upstairs, the green armed light on the keypad died, plunging the house into a vulnerable silence. I went back up to the kitchen and grabbed Michael's car keys. I stepped out into the snow, the cold air hitting me like a slap to the face that woke me up for the first time in months. I didn't look back at the house that had become my prison. Instead, I waded through the knee-deep drifts to Michael's Range Rover, climbed into the driver's seat, and prayed that my hands were steady enough to steal a car. I threw the car into reverse without waiting for the garage door to open fully, gunning the engine in a panic. The roof rack scraped against the rising metal door with a banshee screech that tore through the silent night, and as I hit the driveway, the heavy vehicle fishtailed violently on the black ice, threatening to spin me right back into Michael's clutches. In the rearview mirror, I saw Michael appear in the illuminated window above the garage. He wasn't just shouting, he was screaming and banging on the glass with something that looked like a fireplace poker. His face twisted into a mask of pure animalistic rage. I didn't hesitate. I floored the accelerator, letting the traction control fight the ice as I tore away. I drove until I reached the Mass Pike entrance ramp, where a lone set of headlights was waiting. Helen rolled down her window. "Did you get it?" I held up my phone. "I got everything." "We're not going to the lawyer yet," I said as we pulled onto the highway, watching the snow swirl in the headlights. "We have to make a stop." Helen looked at me, her hands tight on the wheel. "Isabella, every minute we're on the road is a risk. Michael has cops on his payroll. We need to get to Stella." "The text," I insisted, pulling up the message on my burner phone. "The person who told me about the storage unit. They sent another message while I was waiting for you. They want to meet." "It could be a trap," Helen warned, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "Michael could be using a spoofer to lure you out." "No," I said, reading the screen. "They knew about the key under the desk, and they said to meet at the Yankee Doodle Diner in Auburn. That's 40 minutes west. If Michael was tracking me, he'd send police to the house, not a diner in the middle of nowhere." Helen hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but I'm keeping the engine running, and I'm bringing the gun." The Yankee Doodle Diner was a relic of the 1950s, gleaming with chrome and neon against the gray backdrop of the blizzard. It was the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee and secrets were exchanged over cherry pie. We parked in the back near the dumpster. The lot was filled with 18-wheelers idling in the cold, their exhaust creating a thick fog. We walked inside. The air smelled of frying bacon and stale cigarettes. I scanned the booths, my heart hammering against my ribs. I expected a stranger, maybe a disgruntled secretary from Michael's firm, maybe a former business partner. Instead, sitting in the back booth, wrapped in a heavy wool coat and wearing a hat pulled low, was Mrs. Higgins, my housekeeper, the woman Andrew had fired 6 months ago for stealing silverware. Mary? I breathed, sliding into the booth opposite her. Mrs. Higgins looked up. Her face was lined with worry, and her hands wrapped around of black coffee. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Mrs. Walker," she whispered. You look alive. I was so afraid I was too late." "You sent the text?" I asked. "I did. My nephew bought me the burner phone. I didn't want them to trace it to me. If Michael knew I was talking to you..." She trailed off, looking at the door nervously. "Why, Mary?" I asked. "Andrew fired you. He ruined your reputation. Why help me?" "He didn't fire me for stealing silverware," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice trembling with anger. "He fired me because of the milk." "The milk?" She reached into her oversized purse, looked around the diner one more time to ensure no one was watching, then pulled out a small Ziploc bag. Inside was a plastic prescription bottle, the label scraped off. "6 months ago, I walked into the pantry," she said. "Lydia was there. She had a mortar and pestle. She was crushing blue pills into a fine powder. She didn't see me at first. I watched her pour the powder into your almond milk carton, the one only you drink. I felt the blood drain from my face. The almond milk. I drank it every morning, and every afternoon by 2 p.m. the fog would roll in." "I confronted her," Mrs. Higgins continued. "I asked her what she was doing. She smiled at me, that cold, dead smile she has, and said it was vitamins. Supplements for your bones. But I know what vitamins look like, Mrs. Walker. Vitamins don't smell like chemicals." "So Andrew fired you?" "Lydia told him I was stealing. He didn't even ask for proof. She just wanted me gone because I was a witness. But before I left, she pushed the Ziploc bag across the table. I fished the empty bottle out of the recycling bin. There was still dust in the bottom, and I switched your milk. The milk you drank that last week I was there? It was fresh. That's why you felt better that week. That's why you remembered your sister's birthday." I grabbed the bag. Inside was the physical proof of my poisoning. A forensic lab could test the residue. "I kept it," she whispered. "I kept it in my freezer for 6 months. I didn't know who to call. The police would have believed Michael. But when I saw the news, when I saw they were trying to lock you away, I knew I had to give it to you." Helen reached out and covered Mrs. Higgins' hand. "You just saved her life, Mary." "He's a devil," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice hardening. "Michael, he used to kick my dog when he thought I wasn't looking. He breaks things just to see if they'll break. You take him down, Mrs. Walker. You take him down for all of us." I looked at the pill bottle. This wasn't just a paper trail anymore. This was a weapon. "We have to go," Helen said, checking her watch. "Stella is waiting." I stood up. I reached into my purse and pulled out the roll of cash I had taken from the safe, $3,000. I pressed it into Mrs. Higgins' hand. "No," she protested. "Take it," I ordered. "Get out of town for a few weeks. Go visit your sister in Florida. Until Michael is in cuffs, you aren't safe here either." She nodded, tucking the money into her coat. We walked back out into the snow, the wind biting at our faces. But the cold didn't bother me anymore. I had the file. I had the timeline. And now, thanks to the woman they treated like furniture, I had the poison. "That puts us ahead," Helen said as she started the car. "No," I said, looking at the pill bottle in my lap. "That puts us at war." We had abandoned the Range Rover at a desolate rest stop near Framingham, leaving it covered in snow and anonymous among the idling long-haul trucks. I deliberately left the keys in the ignition and the door unlocked. Let someone steal it. Let Michael chase a stolen car signal halfway to New York while we disappeared into the gray morning like ghosts. We drove back into Boston to a brownstone in Back Bay. We went inside, and I realized immediately that this wasn't a polished corporate law firm. It was a war room. The office looked like a library that had survived a bombardment, with stacks of case law, medical journals, and forensic accounting records forming barricades on the floor. Sitting behind a desk buried in paper was Stella, a woman who looked like she chewed glass for breakfast and used subpoenas as napkins. "Show me," Stella said. I opened the cloud drive. Stella put on her reading glasses. A moment later, a man named Silas entered the room silently. He didn't look like a traditional accountant. He looked like a hacker who hadn't seen the sun in a decade, wearing a moth-eaten cardigan and smelling of peppermint tea. "Trace the money," Stella ordered. Silas worked for 20 minutes. Then he turned the laptop. "He moved the assets into an Irish subsidiary," Silas explained, then routed them through the Netherlands to a shell company in Nevis. "But here is the smoking gun." He zoomed in on the authorization field. It wasn't Andrew's jagged, failing scrawl on the line. It was a digital key. Authorized user M. Walker. "Michael?" I breathed, feeling the room spin. He didn't even wait until the body was cold. "And look what he bought," Silas said. He turned the laptop toward me, and a photo filled the screen that made me nauseous. It was a listing for a property in Palm Beach, a sprawling, white stucco mansion with a private dock and a pool that looked like a lagoon. While Michael was lecturing me about turning down the thermostat to save money, he had spent $8.2 million of my inheritance on his own paradise. "Medical care?" I asked, confused by the ledger note. "Yes," Silas said, sliding a document across the table with a look of pure disgust. "Look at the ledger classification." He categorized the withdrawal as long-term memory care facility deposit. He bought a mansion for himself, but he told the bank and the IRS that he was using the $8 million to secure a bed for you in a nursing home. While Silas worked on the financial trail, Stella looked up from her files, her expression grim. "The money is good," she said, tapping a pen against her desk. "The money gets us fraud. But fraud gets Michael 5 years in a minimum security camp if we want to destroy him. If we want to make sure he never hurts anyone again, we need to pin him for Sarah." "Sarah died in an accident," I said. "The police report said she lost control on black ice." "The police report was based on the mechanic's invoice you found," Stella corrected. "The one that said she declined the brake repair. But if that signature is forged, then the car was a weapon." She looked at Helen. "Do we know where the car was serviced?" "McAvoy Motors," Helen said instantly. "In South Boston. Andrew used them for all the fleet vehicles because they didn't ask questions." "McAvoy is dead," Stella said, "but his head mechanic, a man named Russo, is still listed in the city directory. He lives in Dorchester. If he remembers that car, we have a homicide." "I'll go," Helen said, standing up. "No," I said, surprising myself. "We'll both go. Sarah was my friend before she was his wife. I owe her this." We took Stella's second car, a nondescript gray coupe, and drove south, leaving the polished brownstones of Back Bay for the triple-deckers and narrow streets of Dorchester. The snow was piled high here, turning the streets into icy canyons. Russo's house was a small, peeling clapboard structure wedged between a liquor store and a laundromat. A rusted pickup truck sat in the driveway, covered in a tarp. We walked up the icy steps. Helen banged on the door. "Go away," a voice shouted from inside. "I ain't buying nothing." "Mr. Russo?" I called out. "My name is Isabella Walker. I'm Andrew Walker's widow." There was a long silence, then the sound of a heavy deadbolt sliding back. The door cracked open, held by a chain. A sliver of a face appeared, older, unshaven, with eyes that darted nervously between us. "Andrew's dead," he grunted. "Saw it in the obituaries. Good riddance." "We're not here for Andrew," Helen said, stepping closer. "We're here about the Jaguar. The green 2003 XJ, the one Sarah Edwards died in." Russo's face went pale. He tried to slam the door, but Helen jammed her boot into the gap. "We have the invoice, Russo," she shouted. "The one with the forged signature. The police are reopening the case. Do you want to be a witness or do you want to be an accessory to murder? It was a bluff. The police weren't involved yet, but it worked. The fight went out of him. He undid the chain and led us into a living room that smelled of stale beer and regret. I didn't touch the brakes, Russo said, sinking into a recliner that had seen better decades. I swear to God, I told McAvoy I wouldn't do it. Do what? What did they ask you to do? Russo rubbed his face with grease-stained hands. Andrew brought the Jag in on a Tuesday, said the wife was complaining about a squeak. I put it up on the lift. The brake lines were fine. A little worn, maybe, but safe. He looked up at me, his eyes haunted. Then Andrew came into the bay. He handed me an envelope, $5,000. He said, she drives too fast, Russo. Maybe you should loosen the bleeder valve, just a hair, so the fluid leaks out slow, so it fails when she really needs it. I felt the room spin. It wasn't just negligence. It was active sabotage. I told him to go to hell, Russo said. I've got a daughter. I wasn't going to kill a lady for $5,000. Andrew got mad. He took the keys. He said, forget I asked. Just write up an invoice saying she needs a full-line replacement. I wrote it up. Then he grabbed the clipboard and signed it himself. He said, if you tell anyone, Russo, I'll make sure you never work in this town again. I'll bury you. So you let her drive it away? Helen whispered, her voice trembling with rage. I didn't know, Russo cried. I thought he was just trying to scare her. I didn't know that he was gonna do it himself. Do it himself? I asked. I saw him under the car in the parking lot, Russo confessed, his voice barely audible. After he pulled it around the back, he had a wrench. I don't know what I thought. But 2 days later, I saw the news. She went off the Tobin Bridge. No skid marks. You watched him sabotage the car, I said, my voice cold and hard. And you stayed silent for 20 years. I was scared, Russo sobbed. Andrew Walker owned the police commissioner, and he owned the DA. What was I supposed to do? You're going to do something now, I said. I pulled out my phone and hit record. You're going to tell that exact story to a camera, and then you're going to come with us to Stella's office. I can't, he whimpered. Michael, he's just like his old man. He sends guys around sometimes, just to check on me. Michael is going to prison, Helen said, leaning down until she was nose to nose with him. But if you don't testify, Russo, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you share a cell with him. And trust me, you don't want to be locked in a cage with a Walker. Russo looked at the two of us, the widow and the ex-wife, standing in his living room like the Furies come to collect a debt, and realized he had no choice. Fine, he whispered. I'll talk. Just get me out of here before Michael finds out. We left Dorchester with a witness in the back seat. The ghost of Sarah Edwards wasn't just a memory anymore. She was the passenger, and we were finally driving her home. We returned to the brownstone as the sun was setting. When we walked in with Russo, Stella didn't even ask how we did it. She just pointed him to a chair and turned on her video recorder. Russo spilled everything: the bribe, the sabotage, the threat. When he was finished, the room was silent. Stella looked at the financial charts Silas had pinned to the wall and then at the trembling mechanic wiping his eyes. She stood up, looking like a general surveying a battlefield that had just been won. That's it, Stella said, stubbing out her cigarette. That's wire fraud. It's tax evasion. We have the money trail for the fraud. And now, thanks to Russo, we have the malice for the homicide. She looked at me, a terrifying smile spreading across her face. Isabella, when we walk into that courtroom, we aren't just suing him. We're going to hand-deliver him to the Department of Justice. With the evidence printed and the witness secured, Stella looked at us with grim satisfaction. Now, disappear. Go to ground. I'll handle Mason. I need 24 hours to prepare the trap. Helen took me to the Omni Parker house, and we checked in under false names, moving like two ghosts hiding in the city's oldest hotel. We stayed in the room for 2 days, curtains drawn against the world, watching the local news paint a portrait of my insanity. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking. Search continues for missing Brookline widow," while a photo of me, looking disheveled from a bad angle, hovered next to a plea from Michael, who was begging the public to help find his confused stepmother. Against my better judgment, I powered on my regular phone for 30 seconds, and it nearly vibrated off the table with 57 missed calls. I listened to one voicemail from Michael, his voice shifting mid-sentence from concern to a cold, metallic threat. "Mom, pick up the phone. This isn't funny anymore. We know you took the car, and we know you're with someone. If you don't come home in the next hour, I can't protect you from what happens next, because the police are starting to ask questions I don't want to answer." That night, Helen sat by the window, cleaning her gun. Rhythmically, click, slide, snap. "Helen," I asked, the question hanging in the dark room, "why did you really leave? The story Andrew told, he said you had a breakdown and that you tried to burn the house down." Helen stopped cleaning the gun, set it down on the windowsill, and turned to face me. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, she looked ancient, like a ruin that had survived a bombardment. "I didn't try to burn the house down," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the streetlights below. "I tried to burn the journals." Before Andrew switched to Excel spreadsheets and digital lockboxes, he kept leather-bound journals where he meticulously documented his experiments on me. "It was a boy named Thomas," she whispered, the grief still raw after 30 years. "I lost him at 6 months, and the doctors called it a tragic miscarriage caused by stress. But after the baby died, I found the journal in his briefcase. There was an entry from the week before the miscarriage. Subject is reaching breaking point. Sleep deprivation is effective. Introduced herbal tea with heavy abortifacient properties to terminate complications." "He drugged you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "While you were carrying his child?" "He didn't want a child, he wanted a legacy," Helen said flatly. "And when he realized the baby would take my attention away from him, he terminated the pregnancy, not with a doctor, but with tea, stress, and cruelty. Michael learned from the best." I looked at her, realizing the depth of the war we were fighting. We had the files, we had the mechanic, but Stella said we needed one more thing to ensure a conviction. We needed to fracture the alliance. "Michael is the head," Stella had told us on the secure line earlier that evening. "But Lydia is the neck. She facilitates everything. She administered the poison. She managed the isolation. If we can scare her, really scare her, she might turn on him to save herself." "She won't talk to me," I said. "She thinks I'm a fugitive." "She's not at the house right now," Stella said. "I have a private investigator tracking her, the one on our payroll, not Michael's. She's at the Equinox on Dartmouth Street. She has a standing appointment with her personal trainer at 6 p.m. She's trying to keep up appearances." "I'm going," I said. "It's too dangerous," Helen argued. "If Michael finds you..." "Michael is busy looking for a stolen Range Rover in Framingham," I said, buttoning my coat. "And Lydia is alone. I need to look her in the eye. I need her to know that I know." I took a taxi to the gym, pulled my hat low, and wore a large scarf to cover my face. I didn't go in through the front. I waited by the employee exit in the alley, shivering in the cold, watching the door. At 7:15 p.m., the door opened and Lydia walked out. She was wearing a sleek black puffer jacket and carrying a gym bag that probably cost more than Mrs. Higgins' car. She was on her phone, looking annoyed. "No, Michael, I haven't heard from the police." "Yes, I locked the back door. Stop yelling at me." She hung up, shoving the phone into her pocket, and started walking toward her car, a silver Porsche parked under a streetlight. "Hello, Lydia," I said, stepping out from the shadows. She screamed, dropping her keys, and spun around, eyes wide with terror. When she saw it was me, the fear turned to shock. "Isabella? Oh my God! Michael, help!" She reached for her phone again. I wouldn't do that, I said calmly, stepping closer. Not unless you want the police to hear about the almond milk. Lydia froze. Her hand hovered over her pocket. What? What are you talking about? Mrs. Higgins kept the bottle, Lydia, I said. The one you threw in the recycling. We have the residue. We have your fingerprints on the plastic, and we have a witness who saw you crushing the Hall doll into my breakfast. Lydia's face went white. She looked around the empty alley, realizing she was alone with the woman she had tried to erase. You're crazy, she stammered. You're hallucinating. This is exactly what Dr. Trevor said would happen. Dr. Trevor is going to lose his license tomorrow, I said. And Michael? Michael is going to federal prison for wire fraud. We have the Cayman ledger, Lydia. We know about the house in Palm Beach, the one he bought with my money. I don't know anything about a house, she whispered, her voice trembling. Of course you don't, I said, stepping into her personal space. Because he's setting you up. Think about it. Who signed for the pills at the pharmacy? You. Who gave me the food? You. Who fired the housekeeper? You. Michael has kept his hands clean. When the FBI comes, and they are coming, who do you think he's going to blame? The dutiful son or the greedy third wife? I saw the doubt flicker in her eyes. The cracks were forming. She knew Michael. She knew his cruelty better than anyone. I just did what he told me, she whimpered, tears spilling down her cheeks. He said you were sick and that it was medicine to help you sleep. He lied, I said. He was poisoning me, and you were the weapon. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a card, Stella's business card. I tucked it into the pocket of her expensive jacket. You have 24 hours, Lydia. If you call this number and testify against him, Stella might be able to get you immunity. You might avoid prison, but if you stick with Michael, you're going down for attempted murder, and prison destroys skin like yours. I turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows of the city. Isabella, she called out after me, her voice shrill with panic. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she was going to do. She wasn't going to call Michael. She was going to call a lawyer. The next morning, the hotel room phone rang. Isabella, Stella's voice barked. Pack your bags. You need to move. Michael hired a private investigator named Corso, an ex-cop who was kicked off the force for brutality. He just traced Helen's car to the garage next door, and my source says he's standing at the front desk right now, showing your picture to the concierge and flashing a badge that isn't real. We ran down the hallway, the plush hotel carpets muffling our frantic footsteps as we made for the service elevator. The metal cage rattled as we descended, the air growing hotter and smelling of grease as we hit B1, kitchen, and loading dock. But as the doors slid open, our path to freedom was blocked. A man was standing there, Corso. He wasn't hotel staff. He was wearing a cheap leather jacket and had a face that looked like a clenched fist. Mrs. Walker, he said, stepping forward to block the path. Your son is very worried about you. Helen stepped in front of me. Get out of the way, she said. Now, Corso said, reaching for his belt. Let's not make a scene. Michael just wants to talk. He lunged for me, but he made the fatal mistake of ignoring Helen. He saw a gray-haired woman in a wool coat. He didn't see a woman who had spent 20 years chopping wood in Maine and fantasizing about revenge. Helen didn't reach for her gun. Instead, she grabbed the heavy red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall and swung it with the force of a sledgehammer, connecting with Corso's knee with a sickening crack. He went down, howling. "Run!" Helen shouted. We sprinted through the kitchen, dodging startled chefs, and burst out onto the loading dock where Stella's driver was waiting. We dove into the back seat as tires screeched on the ice, leaving Corso shouting into his phone. We were heading to the courthouse, to the lion's den. The black coupe screeched to a halt in front of the Suffolk County Courthouse, a granite fortress that looked less like a hall of justice and more like a tomb. As the driver opened the door, we were hit by a wall of noise and blinding flashbulbs. Michael hadn't just filed a petition. He had orchestrated a media circus to document my breakdown for the world to see. "Mom?" Michael called out, his voice cracking with a perfect, practiced emotion that made the cameras swivel. "Thank God you're safe. Please, just come with us. Dr. Trevor is waiting." He reached for me with an outstretched hand that looked like a plea to the cameras, but I knew that grip. It wasn't the hand of a son reaching for his mother. It was the claw of a jailer reaching for his prisoner. Helen stepped between us, a solid wall of Maine granite. "Back off, Mr. Walker," Stella said, stepping out of the coupe. "My client is here for the hearing. If you touch her, I will have you arrested for assault right here in front of Channel 5. Judge Marcus wasn't just impartial. He was an obstacle. He was an old golfing buddy of Andrew's and a known beneficiary of Senator Crawford's fundraising dinners. He peered at me over his reading glasses with a bored disdain that made it clear. To him, I wasn't a victim of a crime. I was just another hysterical rich widow wasting the court's time and his lunch break. "Mr. Grant," the judge sighed, "you're asking for an emergency temporary conservatorship. The bar is high." "We believe she is an imminent danger to herself," Mason Grant said smoothly. "Mrs. Walker disappeared for 2 days, stole a vehicle, and assaulted a licensed investigator. Her physician, Dr. Trevor, has documented a rapid cognitive decline. We simply want to place her in a secure facility for a 72-hour evaluation." Stella leaned back in her chair, exuding a terrifying calm. "Your Honor, Mr. Walker is not trying to protect her. He is trying to silence her before she can audit the estate. We request an independent evaluation by a court-appointed forensic psychiatrist. And before that happens, we request an emergency deposition of Dr. Trevor regarding his previous diagnoses." "Fine," the judge said. "I'll grant a 24-hour stay on the conservatorship. Depose the doctor tomorrow. If he's credible, I'll sign the order." The next morning, the conference room felt less like a legal setting and more like an operating theater where a dissection was about to take place. Dr. James Trevor sat at the head of the table, exuding the smooth and practiced confidence of a man who had sold his soul by the hour for decades and never once been caught. Stella started slowly. "Dr. Trevor, let's look at your note from January 14th. You wrote, 'Patient presented with confusion. Claimed she was in Ohio. Is that accurate?'" "Yes," Trevor said. "I remember it clearly. Michael brought her to my office. She was very distressed." "To your office? In Back Bay?" "Yes." "And what time was this?" "My records show 2:30 p.m. Stella nodded. "That's interesting, Dr. Trevor, because on January 14th at 2:30 p.m., the blizzard of the century was hitting Boston. All non-essential medical offices were closed." Trevor blinked. I may have the time wrong." "Or perhaps," Stella interrupted, sliding a second document across the table with the precision of a card shark, "you weren't even in the state. This is your credit card statement, Dr. Trevor, obtained through discovery in a malpractice suit you quietly settled last year. On January 14th, at the exact moment you claimed to have been treating my client for hysteria in Boston, you were purchasing a lift ticket at Stowe Mountain Resort in Vermont." There was absolute silence. I dictate my notes later," Trevor stammered. "It's a clerical error." "Let's try another one," Stella said. She pulled out the red file. "Do you remember Rebecca Manning?" I treat many patients. Rebecca Manning, Andrew Walker's second wife. You diagnosed her with early onset dementia in 1998. Both her report and Isabella's report contain the exact same sentence, word for word. Patient exhibits a specific recurring delusion regarding a blue coupe following her. Stella looked up, her eyes blazing. Rebecca Manning was legally blind, doctor. She couldn't see a coupe if it hit her. So why would she have that specific delusion? And why would Isabella have the exact same hallucination 26 years later? You didn't just fabricate the diagnosis. You were too lazy to even write a new fiction. This deposition is over, Mason shouted. We also tested Isabella's hair, Stella continued calmly. It wasn't anxiety medication. It was Haldol, an antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia. You weren't treating her, doctor. You were poisoning her. The deposition ended an hour later. Trevor was a wreck. But we weren't done. 2 days after we broke Dr. Trevor, it was Michael's turn in the chair. We met in the same sterile conference room, but the atmosphere was different. With Trevor, it had been a dissection. With Michael, it was a bullfight. He arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a suit that cost more than my first house and carrying a cup of coffee he didn't drink. He sat down, spread his arms across the back of the chair, and smirked at the camera. He looked like a man who was inconvenienced, not a man who was under investigation for federal crimes. Let's get this over with, he said, checking his Rolex. I have a tea time at 1. Mr. Walker, Stella began, let's talk about the transfer of $4 million from the family trust to Argos Holdings on November 14th. Michael didn't blink. That was a business investment. Dad authorized it before he went into the coma. Authorized it how? Verbally, and with his digital key. He wanted to diversify the portfolio. Diversify, Stella said, into a shell company that bought a mansion in Palm Beach? A mansion where you are listed as the sole resident? It's an investment property, Michael sneered. I was just following his strategy. You know, Michael, Stella said conversationally, taking off her glasses. I've been looking at your father's business records going back 20 years. Andrew never let you handle the big deals, did he? There's an email here from 2019 where he tells the CFO, don't let Michael touch the Seaport deal. He doesn't have the vision. He's a hammer looking for a nail. Michael's jaw tightened. That's out of context. Is it? Here's his will from 2020. He left the controlling shares of the company to a blind trust and not to you. He thought you were, what was the word he used? Impulsive. He changed that will. Michael shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Did he? Stella asked softly. Or did you change it for him? He changed it. Michael yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. He knew I was the only one who could save the company. The old man was losing it. He was soft and was letting opportunities slip through his fingers because he was too busy playing the philanthropist with Isabella. He was losing it? Stella asked, her voice deadly quiet. Michael realized he had stepped onto a landmine, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Towards the end, Michael said, his voice dripping with contempt, he wasn't Andrew Walker anymore. He was sentimental and weak. I couldn't let him destroy the legacy I helped to build. I took control because someone had to be the adult in the room. He signed those transfers because I told him to. So, Stella said, locking the trap, you admit that Andrew Walker was mentally compromised, losing it, as you said, when he signed the transfers on November 14th? Michael froze. If he said yes, the transfers were void because Andrew lacked capacity. If he said no, he admitted Andrew was sound of mind, which meant the medical care categorization was deliberate fraud. Michael stammered. You said he was losing it, Stella corrected. You just admitted to manipulating a mentally compromised person into transferring $8 million to your personal account. I have everything I need. Michael stormed out of the room, shoving past his own lawyer. Phase 1 was isolation, I whispered to his retreating back. Phase 2 was control. But you forgot to write the ending, Michael, so I wrote it for you. Welcome to Phase 3, Liquidation. The morning of the trial, the settlement offer arrived. $5 million, tax-free, plus the deed to the Nantucket estate. I looked at the address on the deed and felt a sick familiarity. Helen had told me about that house. Andrew bought it in 1999, paying in cash just weeks after he finished draining Rebecca's trust fund. It wasn't just a summer home. It was a trophy built on the ruins of his second wife. Now, Michael was trying to use that same blood money to buy my silence. It was more wealth than I had ever owned, but it felt dirty in my hands. Most people would take it. Most people would take the money and run. But I didn't take the pen to sign. I took the heavy black marker from Stella's desk and wrote 2 words across the front of the pristine document, pressing down hard enough to tear the paper. No deal. I slid it back across the desk. Tell him I don't want his money, I said, my voice shaking with the force of my conviction. I want his name and I want his freedom. On the day of the trial, Stella was magnificent. She didn't use flowery language. She just stood at the podium and held up the Project Isabella timeline. This is not a tragedy, she said. This is a business plan for murder by other means. Then Silas took the stand. The funds were laundered into a Florida real estate holding company managed by Michael Walker. But the audit trail doesn't stop there. He paused, looking directly at the back of the courtroom where Senator Crawford's aide was shifting uncomfortably. Significant, illegal donations were then funneled from that account directly into the dark money re-election fund of Senator Thomas Crawford. The room erupted. On the 3rd day, I took the stand. Mrs. Walker, Mason Grant sneered. You claim you found these files on a password-protected laptop. Are you a hacker or are you confused? I'm neither, I said calmly. I'm a wife who listened. Andrew wrote the password on an index card and hid it inside a first edition of The Great Gatsby, I told the jury. He knew it was my favorite book. He knew I read it every year. He hid the key to my destruction inside the thing I loved most because he wanted to laugh at me every time I walked past it. He didn't think I was smart enough to look. He only thought I was sentimental enough to keep it. Michael jumped up. She's lying. She's a delusional bitch. You should have died, he screamed, his voice cracking as he strained against the marshals, spitting the words across the room. You were supposed to just fade away, you useless old bitch. Why couldn't you just die like the others? The courtroom went deathly silent. The stenographer stopped typing. He had just confessed to the jury what the files had only hinted at. The others didn't just die, they were removed. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael Walker, liable for fraud, elder abuse, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil conspiracy. But the civil verdict was just the beginning. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 4 men in suits walked in, the FBI. Michael Walker, the lead agent said, pulling out cuffs. You are under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. Michael tried to run, but the agents tackled him. He looked at me one last time as they dragged him away. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like a child who had realized too late that the monster in the closet was real. 6 months later, I sold the Brookline house. I couldn't live there anymore. I sold the furniture, the curtains, even the china. I didn't want anything that Andrew had touched. I bought a condo in Cambridge, overlooking the Charles River. I have a guest room for Helen, who visits once a month. We drink wine and don't talk about Andrew. We talk about the future. Michael got 12 years in federal prison. The senator got 5. Mason Grant is currently managing a Cinnabon in Omaha, having been disbarred for life. I kept the money, all of it. But I didn't hoard it. I started a foundation called the Rebecca Project to provide legal aid for widows who are being told they are confused. Yesterday, a letter arrived from FCI Danbury. Mom, the letter read in Michael's familiar, jagged scrawl. I know I messed up, but I'm still family. When I get out, we should talk. I have some ideas for a new venture, and I know you'll want to be part of it. I didn't burn it, and I didn't shred it. Instead, I framed it in black wood and hung it in my hallway, right next to the front door, where I see it every time I leave. It serves as a reminder that wolves don't stop being wolves just because they're in a cage. They just get hungrier. But mostly, it hangs there to remind me of the one thing Michael and Andrew never understood, that the most dangerous creature on earth isn't the wolf who hunts, it's the widow who survived him. You've made it to the end. You walk through the fire with Isabella. But I have to be honest, it breaks my heart when I see people listen to these stories, feel these heavy emotions, and then just walk away. No subscription, no support, just silence. It feels like I'm pouring my soul into a void, working days and nights to bring these voices to life, only to be met with ghost viewers. Please don't be another ghost. If this story kept you company, don't just take it and leave. You owe it to the story to leave a mark. A subscribe, a super thanks, or even just commenting your city. Tell me where in the world you are listening from. Let me know exactly where my voice is traveling so I know I'm not alone in this. And if you aren't ready to leave yet, don't. There are 2 more real-life journeys right here on your screen. Pick one. Stay with me a little longer. Don't let the silence win. Until next time.